It was supposed to be a barbershop quartet, and it was ruined. It was ruined.
By the fact that there's only 3 of us.
Ruined because 3 out of 4 of the barbershop quartet were unarmed, but one of them was armed, so we had to kill the entire barbershop quartet because today we are doing Rules of Engagement by the director of The Exorcist, William Friedkin, obviously. Pretty much the same genre. How are Christian and Zach doing on episode 109 or something?
Yeah, 109. That is
nice.
The episode.
Nice. Yes.
Wow.
Very nice.
I'm doing all right. Excited to dig into this. There's a lot to ponder.
Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think it was an interesting watch, and I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. Partially, maybe more because of our opinions than the film. Because I gave it a 2. Christian, I don't want to jump the gun on your thoughts. I saw you gave it a bit of a higher review, but I think in a lot of ways you were a lot harsher on the movie in your review than maybe I was.
Yeah, maybe.
Because as a movie, I quite enjoyed the production of this, and I do agree that this is not a product of the Bill Friedkin who gave us The Exorcist and To Live and Die in L.A. and Sorcerer, this kind of mad documentarian with a very kind of frenetic style. But I do think there's kind of a later career William Friedkin that this feels like more of a product of, which is meticulous William Friedkin, where maybe things aren't as fast-paced and energetic and documentarian as they were during the early part of his career, but he's still giving you all of the information you need in a very calculated and specific way. So I think of like the early scenes of the protest and the attack on the embassy. You see what you need to see and only what you need to see to understand the scene. You see close-ups of the cameras, which establishes stuff that we need to know later. You see the helicopters flying in specific shots for them. You see the crowd in very specific angles. It's all very deliberate and not especially flashy, but it's about, I think, the information and just getting that across to you. So I didn't have a problem with the direction, really. In terms of the story, I did write in my review that I was a little disappointed at the decision at the end to I mean, we're jumping right into spoilers here, but we always jump right into spoilers. Don't listen to this podcast if you care about spoilers. I was a little disappointed at the end with the decision to pretty much entirely, go entirely to the side of Samuel L. Jackson's character was in the right. He did the right thing, and how dare you try to pillory him? And it does kind of set up the government as, you know, this villainous force who's pushing this lifelong military man around, especially in the form of Bruce Greenwood. I think it's Bruce Greenwood, who plays the national security advisor. And he's kind of this mustache twirling villain who disposes of evidence to frame this man. I thought it would have been a lot more interesting in kind of the courtroom content and for Tommy Lee Jones' character if things were left a bit more ambiguous and you didn't know whether Samuel L. Jackson had made the right call, and maybe he even did make the wrong call, but Tommy Lee Jones has to kind of choose between defending his old friend or defending someone who massacred innocent civilians. But a lot of that kind of internal turmoil sort of goes out the window in the third act, and I was a little disappointed by that. So it got a 2 out of 5 for me, but that's not to say there weren't things that I liked in it. This is like it's maybe a bit above like a Hearts War 2 out of 5. I think I gave Hearts War a 2 out of 5. Now that I think about it, maybe I gave that a 3 out of 5. But looking back, I should have given it a 2, and it's above Hearts War.
The disrespect to Bruce Willis.
Yeah, come on, man. Well, I gave this a 2.5. I don't know where and how much I disagree with Zach as to why I gave this less. In my review, I said that the early action scenes feel Hollywoodified in a bad way, and I think I should have spelled that out a little bit more, because I think the action at the embassy is actually quite a decent step up from that flashback when Jones is in the battlefield with him that the movie opens on, where the blood like explodes out of the soldiers as they're shot. It just felt kind of goofy to me in a bad way.
I love that.
And I don't mind that in all contexts, but in this movie, I don't think it worked for me because we're weighing legal and moral principles in such a complicated and sincere way that I think playing up the action just felt kind of silly to me. But
I think maybe I liked that more as a special effect than in the movie. I think I went, no, not the marinara sauce when it happened.
Yeah. And this is another complaint I had, which I have shared on this podcast many times, is casting very recognizable actors in roles where it feels like they're kind of giving a generic performance to me. I think Jackson occasionally eclipses Jones in this respect, like on the battlefield when he gets very incensed and he gives the command to fire into the crowd. That's a pretty big moment that I think he delivers well. But Tommy Lee Jones, I did not love in this. I feel like he's kind of going through the motions, and the courtroom stuff was a very mixed bag. Because some things they did a pretty good job of accurately invoking, at least. Like when Guy Pearce, who is basically the equivalent of the prosecuting attorney, when he's doing some of his trial preparation, he says that they have to prove Colonel Childer's mental state, which is true. That's an important element, especially of like a criminal prosecution. But then Tommy Lee Jones's opening statement is just like a complete mess, which I guess was the point. But so the courtroom stuff was very mixed, and I agree with Zach that I don't know that the film totally endorses Jackson's character, but I do think its standing is confusing in a bad way, and especially the salute at the end I just found confusing.
Yeah.
But I'm sure we'll get into that. 2.5 mixed for me. I wrestled with giving it a 3, but there were just a few bad things for me that brought it down, like the opening scene, the fist fight between Jones and Jackson. What even was that with the like comic book sound effects? What are we doing, guys? That was rough. But there are good moments here and lots to discuss. So 2.5.
Well, if I respect my country at all, I'd give this a 6 out of 5 if I could. I totally so I pretty much knew what I was getting into when I saw when it was made and the poster, and then I wasn't thinking about Freakin' at the time. But between those two things, I was like, this is before 9/11. We know what's coming, right? And I was surprised at how badly pre 9/11 it was. And I will preface this by saying I'm in the Army, in case anyone didn't know. And also, I chose this movie out of a list of movies, many of which I've seen because of Cookie Pocket, Bridge on the River Kwai being the best one that a few of my classmates did ethical briefs on. But we had to do ethical briefs and papers, and kind of talk about an ethical decision point, and we could use any criteria we wanted, basically. So I just used the UCMJ because that was the easiest one used in the film. And I was very intrigued by the end of the film, like Zach had said, and I don't think I agree with it very much. And it's hard not to look at it from like a modern ethical lens, but I will say that the film kind of pigeonholed itself into this dichotomy that is not true, where it's like your immediate assumption has to be, well, we have to murder everybody, and that's kind of like the only option to save the Marines. And I was talking about observations of fire and like how dumb it was that the crowd is more dangerous, even though they had RPGs. I don't recall them ever using RPGs, but I know they had them apparently. And it was just kind of a losing battle from the beginning is what I felt like. It was so painfully obvious to me how bad of a decision it was. On the other hand, a lot of those decisions were made at the time, and a large majority of them were never prosecuted or never even known about. So that I appreciated from a realism standpoint. From a filmmaking standpoint, I thought the action scenes were great for the most part. I also enjoyed the cheesiness of the exploding and the slow motion in the beginning, but I did think it was a little bit overdone. And yeah, the courtroom scene was kind of mid. I'm really on Christian's side with underutilizing the acting. I think especially with the work they had afterwards really proves how much of a low this is for both of them, which isn't saying that their low means that the whole movie is a low because of it. I'm just saying from what they've been in, this is on the lower end. This is like the bottom 40%. And I just think the writing was kind of the main culprit with that. And yeah, I thought that I was surprised how much Tommy Lee Jones was underutilized. I just thought everything was kind of over the top, and I couldn't tell whether or not it was on purpose, I guess, because we know there's a stereotype of like, super high ranking officers and all the saluting and everything, but was that actually, I guess it's kind of going to what Christian was saying. How can you have all these weird like action movie stereotypes, action war film pre-let 9/11 stereotypes in a movie where it's like about the ethical decision making, like the peak of the movies in the courtroom. So and also like just like the silly tape thing, I just thought they were way over analyzing the tapes and stuff. But on the other hand, I think if you do watch it as a popcorn movie and recognize it more as that than as like a think piece, and I don't think it really goes too far, like the writing isn't good enough to make it like a really big thoughtful movie in my opinion. So that's why I gave it a 3. And I was very leaning towards a 2.5. But is there anything that sticks out to you guys you want to talk about? Because this is free form now.
I do wonder if you could call this movie A Few Good Men's exploitation, because especially in the courtroom segments, it does kind of feel like they're trying to ape that kind of tone. Sam Jackson has a blow up moment similar to totally. Jack Nicholson's. Yeah. And also similar to his own blow-up moment in, I think, A Time to Kill, which is another legal thriller where he's on the stand and has a big, yes, they deserve to die, and I hope they burn in hell. I liked the courtroom stuff, I think, a lot more than almost any other part of the movie. And I maybe would have liked it to focus on that a lot more, because... William Friedkin's final film, The Caine Mutiny Court Martial, which came out last year after he died, that was a movie that was, I mean, it's based on a play, but it's about a court martial, and the entire movie is just the court martial and like a little conversation after it. And that's so well directed, and the way they introduce evidence, and so much of it is just people talking in chairs. But it's really a gripping watch. And I think that maybe this could have been that kind of thing if the courtroom was focused on a little more and maybe a little closer to how something like that would actually happen, a little more focused on the procedural details. Maybe I am not a student of the law like one of our cookie pocketeers here, but I do watch a lot of Legal Eagle. So I feel like I know a little bit about things that movies often get wrong in regard to the law, in regard to how a courtroom works. And so there were things in this that I thought, oh, okay, that's not something you normally see, where every time a photo or an article or something is introduced, there's specific reference made to this is exhibit A, B, C, D. It's clear that everything's been logged beforehand, but then sometimes they'll do things that feel like I don't think you could do that in a courtroom. Like when Guy Pearce goes through the newspaper and he like circles the things that have happened in Washington, D.C. that day to try to provide evidence that violent things don't only happen in Yemen. And I thought, oh, doesn't he have to enter that into evidence? Or, it's yeah, in some ways it feels very close and very procedural and detailed. And then other ways it seems like, okay, well, we need this to be a big, exciting moment. So just kind of forget about the textbooks for a second while we work on this scene.
Yeah. The courtroom is strange. I already mentioned the sort of pretrial preparation by Pierce being interesting and semi-realistic. I think part of what frustrated me, especially because I agree with Zach that once we get to the courtroom, I am a little bit more invested and interesting in what is going on.
Mhm.
I think what frustrates me is we spend a lot of time with Tommy Lee Jones, where he goes back to Yemen and he kind of sees many of the injured, and he talks to a doctor, and he speaks with the ambassador's wife to try to get her to testify for him. And this is like, I want to say at least 20 minutes of the movie where he's doing this stuff, and then kind of none of it um, is especially relevant. I guess that doctor eventually testifies, but and there is this narrative suggestion that he's not a very good lawyer, but Childers is only calling on him because he owes him for saving his life, and because he's served, so he understands his situation better. But even with all that being said, his opening statement is such a disaster. Like, if you showed that to any law student or attorney, they would be like, "Oh my God, he's losing this case." It's it's emotional. It's poorly structured. He uses "I feel" statements instead of making a factual based argument. It's pretty disastrous. He rambles about how Childers saved his life once, and he doesn't even really address the question. And then from there, it's just hard to imagine him ever regaining the goodwill of those around him, even accepting that this is a military, even accepting that he's playing to, I guess, the emotional biases of those deciding the case. Even with that in mind, it's a real disaster.
Mhm.
And Philip Baker Hall, who plays I guess Jones's father, is someone I tend to like as a side character, but I was a little puzzled by him here. I think he's just kind of like standing off to the side, and towards the end, there's a very brief exchange between him and Tommy Lee Jones where he's just like, "You did a good job, son," and it's just feels so inert. I can't even explain why it bugs me, but it's like he's just there.
Also,
Um,
the age of actors doesn't normally bug me, but Tommy Lee Jones looks too old to be Philip Baker Hall's son, and I looked it up. There's only 15 years of difference between their ages, so
It's
that
possible.
doesn't work.
It's possible. It's possible.
my
It's possible, but it's certainly not probable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we don't know his
Yeah.
age in the movie.
That's true, but I'm saying he doesn't look old enough. Either Philip
That's
Baker
fair.
Hall needs to look older, or Tommy Lee Jones needs to look younger.
Yeah, I agree. I guess I'll talk about the ethics of it. I guess, and I've been holding this off. Zach is probably chomping at the bit to find out what I argued in class, because
Oh yeah.
my instructor, who completely disagreed with me but still gave me 100, said that this was like the first time anybody argued this, which I thought it was really silly that I was the first one. I had said that he violated all three articles. I said that he shoot, now I'm forgetting all of them. Conduct unbecoming was one of
Yeah.
them. The murder was the worst one, and then breaching the peace was the other one.
Yes. Yeah.
And in the movie, big old spoiler, he gets breaching the peace but doesn't get conduct unbecoming or murder.
Mhm.
And apparently I made a very compelling argument that he had murdered them. But my instructor, who was 20 plus years lieutenant colonel in intelligence and has been deployed multiple times, so has a lot of experience, was like, I would have just, in real life, they would have been dead. Is what he told me. Half jokingly, probably. And I thought that it was, like I kind of mentioned in my intro, it was kind of just a false dichotomy that they, like, the whole basis of this was just really silly to me. I think if the government was that hard pressed to get him, like, to get him on all three articles, I feel like they probably would have done it in real life. Especially not just assuming they didn't have the tapes. Let's not say the tapes were freaking burnt by the National Security Advisor.
Yeah.
Let's just say there weren't any tapes at all. Like, it would have been over. I think. Especially with all the publicity, I think that was kind of the main thing was how quickly it went international and how detrimental it was to the relations with Yemen. And I just thought that was really, in real life, like that would be really freaking silly. And I just thought like, yeah, I just I looked at the whole like battle scene from a different perspective, and I just thought that he made the very quick, immediate decision to waste the MFers, and I thought that was pretty not gonna say dumb, but it was even being under so much pressure and adrenaline in the moment, like being shot at and stuff. I just felt like the position they were in, they could have easily escaped, and I feel like there's pretty much zero strategy in exfiltrating at all. And they had already accomplished the mission of getting the ambassador and all of the personnel out anyway. And they even got the American flag, God bless America, and they still were freaking like staying in this one little like connector on the roofs, and they were like getting shot at from straight across, and then they're getting shot at from below, but we never actually see it as a viewer. So it's like, oh, there's people in the crowd because it looked like to me you just killed a bunch of civilians for no reason. And he never makes that argument until he like drops it like later when he's getting yelled at. I think it was in the courtroom even when he actually admits that there was people in the crowd with guns, but instead he's just like that stern Samuel L. Jackson look like with like a bombastic side eye, like he's twitching, like ready to murder somebody, and he's just like, no one agrees with me, and he's like all salty and stuff. But yeah, like Christian was saying, at least from my perspective, it was a really dumb argument. If you're actually trying to like get into it, and I think actually trying to get into it is where the film completely fails, because it's trying to address too many major ethical decisions at once, and it doesn't really know how to use its actors correctly. And not to mention, there weren't very many supporting actors that were really good in this at all. Besides the prosecutor, I can't really like pin down any. I mean, even Ben Kingsley was like,
oh
I mean,
yeah,
sure,
he not really in it very much, surprisingly.
Right, he's not even in it, and he's one of the main witnesses. So it's like, and he was on the stand and everything, but like it was just, everybody's just convinced like, oh yeah, this is, everyone all of a sudden has the best interest of the U.S. government in their mind. Like nobody thinks for themselves except Samuel L. Jackson now, basically, and Tommy Lee Jones, and that's literally it. And it's like, come on, like, you know what really happened? And she's like, the ambassador's wife's like, no, I can't, because America and my husband's job and whatever. And it's just like, man, that's really simplified stupidity there.
What is the I've forgotten. What's the convincer? Is there like a Perry Mason smoking gun moment where, based on that, the jury, or I'm not sure if they'd be a jury in this case technically, but the observers who make the decision in the case of this this trial, is there like a smoking gun Perry Mason moment that's the convincer? Aha, Sam Jackson is in the right. I don't remember one. Is it just because Tommy Lee Jones gives an impassioned speech?
Yes.
That's kind of a letdown.
Yeah.
What do you think, Christian?
Yeah, and I think it's a letdown both from the standpoint of seeking out the truth of what actually happened in the scene, but I also think the questions posed by the movie are much more than, was the crowd shooting at Jackson and his troops, and was he then justified? I think equally or more interesting is the idea that Jackson takes the heat for this rather than the U.S. government. If they sort of bring the hammer down on him for doing it, does that really like save the United States diplomacy efforts in the Middle East? I think that's a very interesting question that's kind of brought up once and then not really considered again.
Yeah.
And another one just being the moral question of assuming that if he was being shot at by that crowd, then what is the moral thing to do? Which I think is more complicated than the legal question.
Oh yeah.
Because Mitchell, I think you give a very good argument for why he sort of made a mistake, or given their position, how he could have extracted his team and been fine. But sort of, and this is going back to the A Few Good Men-ification or exploitation, however you said it, Zach. But in that big Jack Nicholson speech, spoilers for that film, but I'm sure you all have seen this on YouTube or something if you hadn't seen the movie. Nicholson is basically saying, the iconic line is, "You need me on that wall." That basically arguing that there need to be people that are willing to break these rules to preserve the world order, as it were, and to keep people safe from the dangers and the people that don't respect law and order. So I think that argument. I guess Jackson has a similar emotional basis in his big blow up moment, but a cousin to that would be whether any person in Jackson's situation would have had the emotional, moral fortitude not to fire back, because even being trained as in the armed forces, and it's a very different thing to be in that situation, and I think it's kind of impossible for somebody to imagine how they would react to that situation without being in it. So that's another thing that is just sort of blown by, in part because Jones was a service member and the people judging the Childers were service members. But I think that to an audience member, at least, I think that's also a very interesting question that should have been asked more in the movie.
And I do think the plans are laid for maybe an interesting, again, if the movie didn't kind of become more on Jackson's side, I think in the conclusion, it would be really interesting to see this examination of, well, Jackson made a bad choice, but has he kind of always been the type to make these bad choices and kind of get away with it? Because it feels like the seed for that is planted with the Vietnam stuff at the beginning. And the Yemen issue, it feels like he's making the same type of potentially reckless decision, but this time, just because of the way that the military and the government and the world and the way these issues are publicized has changed, it gets blown up and he's put under a greater spotlight. And maybe the kinds of choices he's been making for decades kind of come back to bite him in this one instance. But and that kind of gets brought up as maybe an issue, but they never really resolve that, I don't think. It kind of gets swept under the rug, or I guess maybe the intention is to kind of excuse that with the testimony of the one North Korean colonel and then the salute at the end, which didn't confuse me so much as it made me roll my eyes. I think this movie, I think, mostly isn't corny like a lot of military movies are, but anytime a movie ends with two soldiers of different nations saluting each other as old men as a tear rolls down one or both of their cheeks, my eyes are rolling.
Yeah. Also, a little bit of the argument was, I bet this was like an aha moment in the writer's room where they were like, what if we bring back the Vietnamese officer, and then all of a sudden, because they're both officers in war, that there's any sort of moral equivalency, or that he would ever, even from the 60s or the 70s, in a completely different political situation, being able to just say like, oh, I would have done the same thing. It's like, what do you mean you would have done the same thing, man? You didn't even know what's going on. Like, and that like, to Christian's point too, also to defend Childers a little bit, there's in law, there's in international humanitarian law, there is the laws of proportionality, right? And every country still does this, where there's an acceptable number of acceptable losses to accomplish a military mission. This is the major, like, most historical example would be the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Like, that's like the biggest one. Like, was that morally justified, but was that militarily justified, is kind of where I'm coming from. So are there scenarios where you'd have to open fire on a crowd that has armed combatants in it, where there's non-combatants present? Yes, because you're not targeting the non-combatants, you're targeting the combatants, and there's collateral damage. Now, how much collateral damage can you accept in that scenario is where it goes into the courtroom, if it ever does. Is kind of pretty much where it comes down to. And obviously, more recently, this is because of social media and everything, it's a lot harder to get away with war crimes, and it's a lot harder to get away with breaking rules of engagement. But
drat.
Yeah, darn. But it happens all the time, and there are, obviously, American Sniper would be a great, like, exaggerated example of that too. about what rules of engagement are like and the scenarios you get put in. But the movie doesn't have enough weight, and it doesn't spend enough time getting into that for it to be a worthy argument or a worthy discussion, even. Which is ironic, being called rules of engagement, where they don't really get into the rules of engagement. They get rid of whether or not the National Security Advisor committed a federal crime. That's really what they talk about a lot. And Tommy Lee Jones taking pictures of the cameras as evidence was kind of funny too. Also, not a single person in Yemen. I guess we can kind of get into the controversy of this too, because there were like accusations of racism and definitely heavy stereotyping here. Are there crowds that are chanting like that in real life? Sure. I don't know what they're saying, but those things do happen, and that's pretty much the only commonality, right? Otherwise, the Yemeni people kind of are kind of just mindless automatons, subservient to whatever terrorist group there is, and I think that's pretty awful. And it only really becomes a major problem for me when Tommy Lee Jones goes to Yemen and he's actually talking to all of them, and it's just like everybody's on the same page. It's like everybody was on the same conspiracy. Nobody has any question about what happened. It's just like America bad is basically the narrative.
Everyone has a jihad tape tucked into their sock. Like,
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's just not accurate. I mean, there are always splinters, and not just in Yemen, but pretty much any militarily analogous situation. It's extraordinarily uncommon for any population to be on the same page like that.
Right.
I think they're trying. My suspicion is that Friedkin and crew were trying to undo that to some extent with the doctor, but I think that came a little bit too little and too late, and still just a confused moment.
Yeah.
I think the real clincher is you're introduced to this little girl with only one leg. And then during the reveal that the crowd was firing on the embassy, even she has a gun and is firing on the embassy.
That was something else.
which does feel like a real, like, you can't trust any of them, and you know, or it feels like it could certainly be interpreted that way, which I think is troubling. And even just on this kind of reminded me a bit of the beginning of The Exorcist in some ways, just in the way that it's filmed. Because at the beginning of The Exorcist, Friedkin also does this, just in the way he films Iraq, you could argue is a little bit racist, because there's this concept at the beginning that if you film people of this different culture that maybe the American viewers aren't so super acquainted with or don't understand, you know, if you film them from a distance and put the right music in the background, which in that film is the Muslim call to prayer, there's this idea that, oh, it's so scary. Like, aren't you unnerved? And that does feel a bit uncomfortable. And this movie does do that as well. When Tommy Lee Jones goes to Yemen, there's lots of shots of just people sitting in doorways. But they're definitely shot, and this section is edited in this way that's meant to be, what are they going to do? Isn't this frightening? And obviously the world's a different place in 2000 than it is now. And tensions around that kind of thing are different at that point, but it's a bit uncomfortable.
I wanted to ask how each of you watched this, and what your respective viewing experiences were like on a technical level. We don't usually get into the weeds on this, but I streamed this for free on Pluto TV, of all places, and I had to deal with probably around 10 ad breaks, which did annoy me and would annoy me more in certain movies. They were well-placed ad breaks during noticeable scene breaks, and the way that the movie is structured, it didn't bother me too much. But the actual quality of the stream was rather low. I would say the image was probably about DVD quality, but the sound was pretty bad. You could really hear the compression to the point that it felt like some of the scenes were shot underwater.
Oh,
And
boy.
like hear like a wave of like.
No, I rented it. I rented it on YouTube, I think, and that was. I tried Pluto. I wasn't gonna deal with that. I'm sorry.
I rented it.
Given up.
Yeah.
I rented it on Amazon, which seemed to be fine. It was in the right aspect ratio. Sound was all right. No ads. There was I think this is just the film and not the print that's on Amazon, but the color grading did change like kind of drastically between some scenes, which kind of caught me off guard. But that might just be a choice to, the courtroom is going to look very different to Sam Jackson's quarters or whatnot. But there's been a lot of discourse on film Twitter recently about how you can never guarantee that any print of a movie is how it's actually meant to look. So it's just something that which is kind of true to a certain extent. But it's definitely something that I'm thinking about more recently. But yeah, rental looked totally fine. And it was not, sometimes if you rent something through Amazon, particularly if it's like an Amazon extension or affiliate, they'll like crop it into 16:9 regardless of the aspect ratio. But they did not do that for this one. So
good. Yeah.
Good.
I didn't notice the color grading thing, but I thought at least the scenes at the embassy weren't that like bleached yellow orange that you get.
Yeah. They didn't look like Mexico in Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
I also want to say that it was probably a more discernible war crime when he blows the brains out of the radio transmission operator in Vietnam. That was pretty bad. And also, I think it was interesting to bring that back, but then they kind of go too far with it, like we already mentioned. But I will say that they do a good job of separating that was I don't want to say more acceptable time for war crimes, but it definitely was from the U.S. perspective anyway. And,
things slipped by easier.
Yeah. And and I thought the actor for the Vietnamese officer was pretty good, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's all I have for final thoughts.
All right.
I don't know. 2.5. I didn't take much note of the score. I didn't notice it a lot, but in a movie like this, I think that might be a good thing. I just wish it asked more of the questions, and we you guys mentioned a few minutes ago the scene where you see that one of the little girls in the crowd has a gun too.
Yeah.
And I was confused during that scene. Like, are we seeing what Jackson wanted to see, or are we? There are certain reveals and points that just didn't align totally with my experience, but I still 2.5 asks good questions, but maybe not all of them, and doesn't answer the ones that it does ask, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd say if you want to see a better courtroom film from Friedkin, Kane Mutiny Court Martial is very, very good. And this movie, I think, joins Pearl Harbor and Black Hawk Down in the I can't believe it's not after 9/11 trio for me. Or watching this, I was sure that this was going to be like 2003, but no, 2000. That really surprised me.
And to add in another Friedkin recommendation, To Live and Die in LA is a very different movie from this, but it does kind of weigh similar questions of excessive force and how to properly respond to violent threats in a very interesting way.
Do you think Childers is guilty of murder, Christian?
Legally?
Yes. Yes, I do.
What's your interpretation, counselor?
Yes. Did he fully drunk milk?
Well, I would say there needs to be more evidence for me to give you a conclusive answer on this.
That's good.
Assuming the scene where everyone and the children have guns and are shooting into the shooting at him and his men, I would say no.
Okay.
But I honestly the film took me back and forth so many times that I wasn't sure what actually happened at the scene, which may have been the point.
Okay.
But and even with that salute bit at the end, I still don't know that Friedkin is necessarily sold on him having done the right thing. It feels less about whether what he did was right and more about not letting the government put the fall on him instead of on them.
Exactly.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Also, all of the junior officer and pretty much all the Marines that opened fire would have all been probably prosecuted, and because they have they have the choice to deny orders that are immoral, or
Oh
unethical.
yeah, no Nuremberg defense. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's another problem. But which is, well, by the way, A Few Good Men does a great job of going back and forth of who actually did it versus who ordered it. So anyway,
we can review.
Yeah.
All right. I haven't done this in a couple seasons, but this week in review, I'm going to talk about something that I made instead of something I watched.
Oh.
Because my film, The Search for Alexander, which if you follow me on social media, you might remember about a year ago, was all you ever saw about 8 times on Instagram per day from me. It's finally out on YouTube. It's on the City Mist Productions YouTube channel. It's finished its festival circuit. We had a good run. And now it's out for everybody to see. There's a good chance that folks listening to this might have backed it in some way for on the crowdfunding platform, on the campaign. And now, if you didn't get an advanced screener, you can see the results of your funding. It's definitely the biggest thing I've made so far. I've got plans for a thing later this year or early next year that might be a bit bigger, but it was pretty adventurous for my capstone film in film school, and I think we pulled something pretty cool off. I'm pretty proud of it. Certainly the crowning jewel, I think, of my work so far. So check it out. It's going to be up there for as long as YouTube lasts, as far as I know. So have fun with it.
Well, there wasn't a top hat. There wasn't a briefcase. And
there was a top hat.
Wasn't it a bowler hat? Oh, the guy with the...
There is yeah. In fact,
you have the high school.
You heard it here first, folks. When I wrote the script for The Search for Alexander, I intended the man in black to be the same character who appears in The Briefcase, the first film I ever made, which starred Christian here.
Oh dear.
And I considered even reaching out to the same actor who appeared in that film, but ultimately did not end up going that route. But if you listen to the podcast, you know this special little gem. They're in a connected universe. It's the same character. What did he do with the briefcase? What does the briefcase have to do with this film? Who knows? I do, but you don't.
It's got to be in a different dimension. That's the only explanation.
I'm not telling.
As long as you know, Zach, as long as you know and we don't, that's okay.
Yeah.
But I felt like maybe Friedkin didn't know sometimes with this film.
Yeah.
I have been watching a lot of things lately. I've been rewatching more Pixar and Disney films to sort of work on a ranking of each. I'm a big fan of particularly their animated films. But this one is not a rewatch. For the first time, I watched The Black Cauldron, which is a Disney animated feature that came out in 1985, which was a real surprise to me because watching it didn't feel outdated or unimpressive from an animated respect, but I felt like it had more in common visually with some of their work from the 50s and 60s, or at least the 70s, than something that was made less than a decade before Beauty and the Beast, for example. And the art direction here is really great. There's basically every background is beautiful and dark and interesting in a way that the other Disney animated films aren't as much. But the characters are quite weak, and their names don't help. Their names include Terran, Elanwi, Gurgi, Fluder Flam, with a double F at the beginning of both of those. But the Horned King, the villain, is an excellent work of design and voiced by John Hurt to good effect. There's just some weird sequences in here. The middle act in particular, there's a bunch of witches and fairies show up. A man gets turned into a frog and is caught between the cleavage of one of the witches for an uncomfortable amount of time.
Forgot about that.
What would be a comfortable amount of time?
I don't know, less than what was here. Like a second or two. This was like a solid minute, it felt like. I don't know. There's a short little hairy guy named Gurgi who speaks very similarly to the way Andy Serkis speaks as Gollum about 15 years later, which is kind of a fun surprise. but even with great animation, it's just kind of dull. And the main character, who is this very generic boy who's probably in the mold of Arthur, in the Once and Future King sense, gets this magical sword that lights up and makes what sound like kind of dollar store version of lightsaber sound effects, which I thought, oh, that's kind of funny that they did this. Still assuming this was in the 60s or 70s. It's funny that they had something similar, but this came out 2 years after Return of the Jedi, so I think that was probably a merchandising or some sort of Star Warsy thing. But ultimately, 2.5, not super memorable, but interesting art and short enough that you could give it a try if you like.
For a long time, I called The Black Cauldron my favorite Disney movie because I hadn't actually seen it. But what I had seen was the footage that Michael Eisner forced them to cut out of it. Because the Horned King's undead army, there's originally a scene where a bunch of living people, they break into the castle and they get overrun by this kind of green smoke. And you see like their skin and muscles melting off as they turn into skeletons. And I saw just that scene and I thought, well, that's awesome. This has got to be great. And then I found out it was not. Yeah. But yeah, it is kind of a disappointing watch. I agree. Something that's interesting about The Black Cauldron, though, is Elmer Bernstein, who did the score, also did the score, I think, for Ghostbusters. And you can really tell in some of the cues. Some of the cues are definitely rough drafts of Zool music.
Zool.
That's fun.
Zool. You know what's cool about Zool? Nothing. You know what is cool? Following their explosive showdown, Godzilla and Kong must reunite against a colossal undiscovered threat hidden.
That would have been an
world.
Amazing Frozen Empire transition if that's what you were about to do.
Frozen Empire. I don't know about what's frozen about this, but they're challenging their very existence and our own. Rise together or fall alone. Godzilla x Kong, the new empire. Now, okay, you have to watch Godzilla versus Kong to understand what's going on in this, right? You don't have to watch any of the Toho anything to understand about anything. Just pretend Toho doesn't exist for a minute. I know it's hard. Just pretend it doesn't exist. Right now, we're in the John Goodman Monarch universe, okay? That is what we're dealing with, right? And you have to watch the Monarch TV show to understand what's going on. No, I'm just kidding. But it actually is a very good show, and I recommend watching it. But it does help with this movie a little bit. I watched Godzilla vs. Kong, and I thought it was pretty great for what it was. I understood the director's intent. I understood that Wingard wanted to make a big CGI monster film and be creative with it. And he got very creative with it in Godzilla vs. Kong. The human characters suck. Everybody knows it. And this felt like he wanted to delve in the lore a little bit. And I thought that was stupid. But I did think some of the lore was interesting. But overall, I think the decision to go in that direction with this film, to get more into why the monsters do what they do, and why is there an underground world, and how do they relate to each other, and there's cave drawings explaining the whole thing. There's native people of some Asian descent describing what happened and whose side they're on, and why Mothra is the greatest Titan, which is true. I loved Mothra, right? And I thought that was very silly, and I think that is my major criticism. You really have to know what you're getting into with these Monarch films. You cannot watch this thinking it's a Godzilla movie. You can't go into it thinking it's a Kong movie, right? And the little Kong was funny. He was useful. He was like a Robin to Batman, and I thought that was fine.
Mm-hmm.
And
Diddy Kong, if you will.
Diddy Kong, yes, absolutely. He doesn't have a hat. I wish he did, but yeah. The human characters are arguably worse, I would say. I was somewhat disappointed, but Brian Tyree Henry, although he is the comedic relief, was probably my favorite character, honestly. Kaylee Hoddle, I think her name is the little girl that's was found in Kong's environment. Skull Island people, I keep forgetting what their name is, but yeah, she was good. Yeah, all the main actors just completely flat to me. But I know Wingard doesn't care. I know that's why he just doesn't care. But my criticism would be, if you don't care, why are they even there? Why is there even a human story at all? It adds no perspective. It is not relevant. It is not. It's like Godzilla -1 is the complete polar opposite, where everything is about humanity, and this is nothing about humanity and everything about the monsters. The monsters, I would say, a big argument is that, are they glorified Marvel characters? In some aspects, yes, they are. But I think adding some personality to them does add diversity to the fights. You know, kind of like the little smirks and stuff here and there. And Kong acts like a monkey. Godzilla acts like a lizard, although sometimes he kind of acts like a person once in a while. But for the most part, I enjoyed this moderately. And I do think Godzilla versus Kong was a better vision of what Wingard would want for this kind of universe.
I know that the titling is sort of an effort to maximize the excitement of everything, but can I just ask, what on earth is supposed to be meant by Godzilla X Kong?
So go ahead, Zach.
Why isn't it just Godzilla and Kong? Like,
in a lot of the, well, like 90s 2000s, a lot of the Japanese movies use X, and now I don't know how that gets pronounced in the Japanese language, but when those titles are directly translated to English, it usually just becomes Godzilla and Mothra, Godzilla and King Ghidorah. Yeah, I don't. But I most of the trailers, if there's like voiceover, it's Godzilla X Kong, which, it is a weird thing to. Yeah. I'm surprised by the choice to. I totally get why they did Godzilla versus Kong. I think that was always going to happen. They did Godzilla, they did Kong. Of course, they're going to build them up to fight each other and then have to divert and fight somebody else at the last minute. That's a tradition of Godzilla, and also a tradition of Godzilla versus Kong movies. I'm kind of surprised at the choice to do another movie with both of them as the direct sequel to that last one, because I don't know, it kind of feels like they're trying to make them into like this Batman and Robin team, which I think is totally the wrong thing to do with the Godzilla characters. That's just my interpretation. I'm kind of like a Japanese Toho purist when it comes to Godzilla.
Yeah.
And those do get pretty silly, so I'm not like averse to silliness, but yeah, it did seem a weird choice to me to lean so heavily into like the pairing of the two, and they're running together in this shot that makes them look like 6 feet tall. Yeah.
the new Ultraman had more continuity in the story than this did. I'll say that. And I'll also say my dad predicts that they'll be going on to Aliens next, which I think makes the most sense considering they've gone everywhere else. And I also think that Hollow Earth is, the lack of better words, beaten into the freaking ground now. I think I'm done with Hollow Earth. And also just because the show is pretty much centered around Hollow Earth. No pun intended, centered around Hollow Earth. But regardless, it is a film, and we'll see where the universe goes next. So.
Well, I'm glad it met that standard. I'm glad it rose to the level of being a film.
Yeah. Regardless, Zach, you better start running away.
Uh-oh. I'm strapping on my Nikes.
Yeah, and you better not be armed. Actually, it doesn't matter, because I'm going to waste you. Because of America.
All right. It seems in poor taste, but okay.
I had a hard time thinking of things for this one, but Mitchell, you'll start us off. Are you ready?
No. Yes, I'm ready.
Okay.
Wait. Did you send it to me? Wait, did you send it to me?
It's you sent it to me.
Oh, right. Okay, I get it. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. In 3, 2, 1, go.
Negative effect.
2 out of 5.
Proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
3 out of 5.
Exploding liquids in slow-mo.
4 out of 5.
Stopping before someone gets hurt.
4 out of 5.
Semper Fi.
2 out of 5.
Learning how to fly fish.
3 out of 5.
Middle Eastern protest number 473.
2 out of 5.
You speak English?
3 out of 5.
The chant never dies.
4 out of 5.
The Star Spangled Banner.
3 out of 5.
Didn't he know where he was? The Middle East.
3 out of 5.
Back in Nam.
2 out of 5.
SLJ paparazzi.
2 out of 5.
Al Gore survives.
3 out of 5.
TLJ harassment.
3 out of 5.
A Girl Named Killer.
2 out of 5.
Stopping it before someone gets hurt.
3 out of 5.
Faulty recordings. 1 second.
4 out of 5.
Movie title.
Time.
Nope.
Ooh.
Don't say anything.
Time.
That is okay. Al Gore did that to me too. I went, is that Al Gore? But the do you speak English? That's a good point. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it feels like there's a lot of callbacks to other Samuel L. Jackson movies in this film because there's they speak English and what is a very well remembered Sam Jackson line. But yeah,
if I had organized the rundown the way I usually do, I would have given that one to Mitchell. But when I saw it coming up, I knew I just had to go for it. So.
It was good. It was good. So what are we previewing next?
So next time it's my turn to host my first film of the season. I realized looking at my kind of episodes, my films I've chosen for this season, is a very musical lineup for me this season. But the first film we're going to be watching straight out the gate is Bob Fosse's All That Jazz, starring Roy Scheider. This is a film that I think is really good. It's one of my favorite musicals, and I think maybe the only Fosse-directed film I've seen, but that's also kind of appropriate because the movie is in a lot of ways kind of a self-portrait. So I'm excited to see what you guys think. I'm excited to see what our viewers think if anybody chooses to check it out because we're covering it and they haven't seen it before. And yeah, that'll be next time. All That Jazz, directed by Bob Fosse.
Amazing.
Cool. I'm excited for that one.
Well,
all right.
Okay.
Time to tune out.
Tune
Bye,
out.
guys.
Bye.